Imagine training a model on text, where a handful of common words show up constantly and thousands of rare words appear only once in a while. If every parameter shares the same learning rate, the rare words barely get a say. Their updates are tiny and drowned out. Back in 2011, Duchi and colleagues proposed one of the very first optimizers to fix this by handing every parameter its own learning rate that adapts to its own history. It's called AdaGrad, and today we're walking through how it works, why it shines on rare features, and a famous flaw that eventually retired it. Start with the contrast that makes AdaGrad click, because it's really a story about fairness between parameters. Plain stochastic gradient descent applies the same fixed learning rate to every parameter, whether that feature shows up in every example or almost never. Common features and rare features are treated identically. So the rare ones, the infrequent words, the unusual signals, get updated so gently that they struggle to ever learn anything useful. AdaGrad breaks that symmetry. Every parameter earns its own learning rate, shaped by the gradients it has personally seen over training. Parameters hammered by large or frequent gradients get reined in. Parameters that rarely fire keep a generous rate. Suddenly, the rare features get a real, meaningful voice in the update. Here's the mechanism, step by step, and it's surprisingly compact. Accumulate the sum of squared gradients for each parameter. Every time a parameter gets a gradient, square it and add it to that parameter's running total. This total is a memory of how much action that particular weight has seen since training began. Divide each parameter's learning rate by the square root of its accumulated sum. A parameter with a big total gets a small effective rate. A parameter with a tiny total keeps a large one. The scaling is entirely personal to each weight. Because of that, frequent parameters automatically shrink their steps while rare parameters stay bold. This is precisely why AdaGrad is beloved for sparse data, like natural language with its long tail of rare words. The infrequent features finally get updates large enough to matter. But watch that accumulated sum. It only ever grows, since you keep adding squared gradients and never subtract. Over a long run, the denominator swells, the effective rate keeps shrinking, and eventually the steps get so microscopic that learning simply stalls. So let's crystallize the 3 things really worth remembering about AdaGrad. Here, each parameter gets a rate from its accumulated square gradients. That's the heart of it. Each weight scales its own learning rate using the history of gradients it alone has experienced. It's genuinely great for sparse features. When most inputs are 0 and only a few fire, AdaGrad keeps the rare, informative signals learning strongly instead of letting the common ones dominate everything. But the denominator grows forever. Because it never forgets a single past gradient, the effective rate decays without bound, and learning eventually grinds to a stop. That single flaw is exactly what RMSProp and Adam later set out to repair. Let's lock in the 4 essentials before we wrap. AdaGrad, from Duchi and colleagues in 2011, was one of the first optimizers to give every parameter its own adaptive learning rate. That rate comes from dividing by the square root of each parameter's accumulated square gradients. So busy weights slow down and quiet ones stay lively. It's especially strong on sparse data, where rare features finally receive updates big enough to actually learn from. But its denominator grows without bound and eventually stalls learning, a flaw that RMSProp and Adam fixed with a decaying average. If breaking machine learning ideas down like this is your thing, you'll find plenty more waiting at standardy.com. See you over there.